يا سائلي عن مذهبي وعقيدتي رزق الهدى من للهداية يسأل.
All praises for Allah, peace and blessings be upon His last and final messenger, upon his family, his companions, and all those who follow him up until the day of resurrection. First and foremost, I want to welcome everybody here. Thanks for coming, taking your time out to come and listen to this very important lecture. Also, I want to thank Brother Subboor for traveling all the way from London to come here to enlighten us on this very, very pivotal topic.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان. الشمس والقمر بحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان وأقيموا الوزن بالقسط ولا تخسروا الميزان. والأرض وضعها للأنام فيها فاكهة والنخل ذات الأكمام والحب ذو العصف والريحان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. خلق الإنسان من صلصال كالفخار وخلق الجان من مارج من نار فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. رب المشرقين ورب المغربين فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان. مرج البحرين يلتقيان بينهما برزخ لا يبغيان فبأي آلاء ربكما تكذبان.
بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله أما بعد. Now I've been exposed, you can see how many emails I don't actually answer because I couldn't find the presentation. So today's presentation is very, very important because this is regarding a central idea, an idea which I think every single person in this room and every single person in the world to some extent has been affected by, which is God, evolution, and Darwinism. Now the first thing I want to do is I want to show you this picture because like you have, I would say, for say Birmingham City University, you have your logo, right? That logo represents a sort of maybe history of it, an icon of it, identity of the university. And it's instantly recognizable. And when you see an image like this, you can instantly recognize, right, this is something to do with evolution, this is something to do with Darwinism, perhaps this is something to do with atheism. You can instantly recognize this, and there's no better image to start a talk about Darwinism or evolution than this image. But what I do want to cover today is only one thing about this image and the actual knowledge about Darwinism, evolution, and God, which exists in the popular narrative on YouTube, through lectures, through biology textbooks, that this image is actually false. It is false to believe that this represents the way that evolution actually works. And when I first discovered this, it was very hard to believe, because this is exactly what I associated with evolution, with Darwin's theory. Yet this image is the very same image which you will find in books like Philosophy of Human Evolution, published by Cambridge University by an atheist philosopher of science called Michael Ruse. He takes this image and he says, this is not the way evolution works. And likewise, Henry Gee, who is again another atheist evolutionary biologist, he's the senior editor of Nature, which is the most prestigious journal in the world. In his book, The Accidental Species, Misunderstandings of Human Evolution, right at the beginning, he takes this image and then he says, this is what the public thinks evolution is about, but this is actually false. And I want to start on this image because I want there to be a paradigm shift in your minds. And what I mean by a paradigm shift, if you haven't come across that term before, you know, you get those images online, it looks like it's two faces looking at each other. When you look at it from another perspective, it's actually a vase. You guys know what I'm talking about? A paradigm shift, right? I want you guys to have a paradigm shift when it comes to evolution, when it comes to Darwin's theory, Darwinian evolution, and when it comes to the role of God and atheism within this theory. And the reason why this image is there is right from the beginning, you can understand, just like there's a misconception, hopefully, which has now been clarified, that this is not the way that evolution actually works. Throughout this lecture, inshallah, by the permission of Allah, you will see that there are many images and icons and impressions about Darwinism which are actually false. Now, the clearest reason why this image is false is because Darwinian evolution is undirected, it is purposeless, it doesn't have a goal. There is no such thing as going from simple to complex without a reason. So this idea of we are at the apex of billions of years of evolution and human beings are somehow the end result, this is actually from an ancient quasi-religious idea known as the great chain of being. But when it comes to evolution, as Darwin understood it, Darwinian evolution, there's no such thing as progress. And this image clearly shows progress. So throughout this presentation, you will see, inshallah, that many of the icons of evolution are going to be shattered. And not shattered by myself, shattered simply by bridging the gap between the popular perception of Darwinian evolution and the way it is actually pursued in academia by secular mainstream academics. Not based on some religious ideas, based on mainstream secular academics. Now, what I'm going to be covering today is 5 simple things. Firstly, science and certainty. Does science lead to certainty? And I'm going to be giving reasons why philosophers of science say science doesn't actually lead to certainty. Now, we as Muslims, if somebody was to ask me, a direct question and say, what is Islam's view of the theory of evolution, Darwinian theory of evolution by natural selection? What is Islam's view on that? My answer, which is a very simple answer, which is an answer which any scholar of Islam would actually give, is we believe in science as a method and all of its conclusions. But all of the conclusions in science, according to mainstream secular academics, are uncertain. They can change. They're based on a probabilistic framework, they're based on assumptions, and there's always alternatives. And what is the Islamic view about Darwin's theory of evolution? We can answer that by saying, what is the Islamic view on general relativity? What is the Islamic view on string theory? What is the Islamic view on quantum mechanics? And the answer is simple. We can accept it as a working model, as a working theory, as a working paradigm, but no one, whether you're Muslim, Christian, atheist, Jewish, whatever, no one has the right to say that this conclusion in science is absolutely certain, because nothing in science can be certain. Secondly, I'm going to be going over the current state of Darwinism as per mainstream secular academics, which is that it is based on a probabilistic framework which has multiple assumptions which are being challenged by other evolutionary biologists, and there are disputes, dissension, and alternatives about its most fundamental ideas. The third area I'm going to be covering is God and Darwinism. What is the relationship between Darwin's theory of evolution and God? Because if I was to ask you, generally, what is the link between, Darwin's theory of evolution and atheism? Most people in this room, and I think most people in Birmingham, or most people in the world, would say there's some sort of link. But yet, if I was to ask a different question and say, what is the link between string theory, or general relativity, or some other theory in science and atheism, there'd be a blank response. It'd be like, there's no connection. So obviously there's some sort of connection between atheism and Darwinism. Also, I'm going to be covering why Darwin's theory of evolution is unique. And I'm just going to spill the beans now, why it is actually unique, because according to mainstream secular academics, it is the only theory in the history of science which has morphed from a theory of biology into a religious system, into a political system, and into an ethical system. In the history of science, which has been around for approximately 1,000 years, and the first scientist, according to historians of science, was Hassan ibn Haytham, who was a Muslim, who was also a Quranic scholar, and he is the one who came up with the scientific method. So all of, sometimes when we look at textbooks, or popular lectures, whenever it speaks about science, it goes back to Francis Bacon, or may go back to Galileo, and before that, there may be a little hint of, and the Arabs did something, right? But if you actually study it in depth, you find that historians such as David C. Lindbergh, who is not a Muslim at all, he says the first scientist and the person who came up with the scientific method was actually a Muslim, Hassan ibn Haytham. This was hundreds of years before Galileo. Also, lastly, I'm going to be going over Islam and science. What do we as Muslims do when we come across scientific theories which conflict with our theology? What is the correct Islamic response? Okay, like I mentioned previously, terms of engagement. None of the people I'm going to be referring to today are people who believe in God, people who believe in religion, people who believe in Islam, Christianity, Judaism. This is nothing to do with creationism or intelligent design. All of the people I'm going to be referring to today are going to be secular, mainstream, people who believe in naturalism, well-known atheists, and I'm going to be referring to peer-reviewed mainstream journals. Okay, first thing to understand is what is science. Now this can get into a very, you could give a 2-day course on what is science and the discussions about it. But in a very simplistic way, what is science? Science is to arrive at conclusions about the world based upon observation. So what you do, you come up with a hypothesis to explain a particular phenomena, then you test that hypothesis repeatedly until that hypothesis becomes into a theory. Now something which is very important to understand, a theory, when we're speaking about our common language, is something very vague. Bro, I have this theory that we didn't really go to the moon. It's just such a crude thing. A theory is just any idea, any hodgepodge idea that you have about something. You just call it a theory. But we have to be very, very careful, because in the scientific discourse, theory is something very substantial. It is something very powerful. It is something which has been tested again and again, and it is a conclusion which scientists have arrived at after a lot of research. It is not, I have this vague idea, about something, and I think this is what happened, and this is my theory. No, that's a hypothesis. A theory is something which goes through rigorous testing, and it is a conclusion which scientists generally agree about. And Darwin's theory of evolution is a scientific theory. Now, there's sometimes people who say, yes, a scientific theory, but it's not a fact, or it's not a law. Well, science doesn't give you, the highest thing that science will give you is theory. That's the highest level of certainty it will give you. A theory encompasses observations, and a theory encompasses laws. But the theory is the highest level of certainty you can ever get to. So if you're speaking to someone about Darwin's theory of evolution and you say, yeah, but it's just a theory, you're going to sound quite ridiculous, because a theory is something which is quite substantial in science. It's not just a random guess. Now, why do we love science? We love science because it works. Imagine if you are living during the time of Isaac Newton, and we have Newton's equations, and you have the Newtonian model of the universe, and you were to live from the time of Newton till 2017 March, today, you would have seen that Newton's model of the universe has worked for over 200 years. And what you would do with Newton's equations is you would say, okay, where is a planet going to be at a particular time during a particular season or whatever, and you can make a precise prediction about where that planet is going to be, and you will find it there. That's how successful Newton's model of the universe actually was. So we love science because science actually works. But there's two issues why, even though science works, it doesn't mean it's absolutely true. It doesn't mean it's absolutely certain. It'll just give you workable models. The first is the black swan problem. Now, what it basically is the way that science works, you take a limited set of observations and you make a general conclusion. So there's a scientist, and this scientist says, okay, what color are swans? Now he repeatedly tests and he observes swans are white, swans are white, swans are white, swans are white, and then that hypothesis is elevated to the level of a theory. Now, once he has that theory that all swans are white, one day he comes across a black swan, an observation which challenges his previous conclusion, a novel observation, and he has to get rid of that conclusion. And that theory has to be revised. This is known as the black swan problem. Observations which don't fit in your current theory. The second is the scatter graph problem. Now, I want you to imagine if you were given this graph with these dots, and these dots represent observations. They represent things which have actually been observed. And I was to ask you, can you draw a line explaining this data? Now, some people in this room, they may draw a straight line from the bottom to the top, from the bottom left to the top right. Some others may make an inverse, some others may make a bell curve, some others may make a sine curve, some others may make a tan curve, whatever. Multiple theories are possible on the same observations. Multiple lines are possible on the same scatter graph. This is the scatter graph problem. The issue in science is the same data can give rise to multiple alternative theories. And this is something not unknown. This is well known within the philosophy of science, but generally the public doesn't actually know this. They don't know about the black swan problem and the scatter graph problem. So just to summarize, novel observations, which are observations which challenge your previous conclusion, and secondly, alternative theories based upon the same observations. Now, what I could do, and it would make my life a lot easier, is finish the presentation here. I could sit down, walk outside, and I could take a picture of that big dig that you have outside, because this is the only university where I've seen people are bringing, it has to be in Birmingham, where they bring in a pot of rice, biryani, right? I could just finish the presentation here and say, you know, guys, my job is done. Why is it done? Because is Darwinian evolution absolutely true? Well, here's the answer, and the answer is actually on this slide. It is a scientific theory, and no scientific theory can be absolutely true because of the black swan problem and because of the scatter graph problem. And that's basically it. That's all I'm here to actually talk about. And what I'm going to be covering from now on is actually examples of the black swan problem and examples of the scatter graph problem within Darwinian evolution. Now, say if the scatter graph problem and the black swan problem, I couldn't find any examples within Darwinian evolution, or secular academics didn't realize there was black swan problems and there was scatter graph problems, it wouldn't make a difference to the argument, because just because you can't think of data that challenges your theory doesn't mean that data doesn't exist. And many scientific theories were successful for hundreds of years before somebody realized, hang on, there's some pieces of data which don't actually fit. And like I mentioned in the beginning, paradigm shifts. Thomas Kuhn is a philosopher of science. He's got this landmark book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, and he shows, look, physics, biology, chemistry, if you look at it over a long period of time, science goes through revolutions, it goes through paradigm shifts, and no scientific theory can be absolutely true. So this is well known. Now what doesn't obviously change is observations. Now there we have a picture of a trilobite. No matter what observations you're going to have in the future, the observation you already have of a trilobite is not going to disappear. So of course the observations are absolutely true. They're just there. I'm not saying, and nobody says, that scientific observations, things that we've observed, will never change or are never certain. No, those will always remain. But what does change is those green dots. You get more and more observations, and you can make more and more theories based upon those observations. And even if your observations remain the same, you can still make alternative theories. So, whether it's the shape of the Earth, whether it's the observation of water being composed of hydrogen and oxygen, whether it's the fact that DNA, as we know it, is a code, right? These observations do not change. These observations are absolutely true. What does change in science is the overall theories which are used to explain the observations. Does that make sense? I'm going to keep repeating as a parrot throughout, because I know this is sometimes a point which is overlooked. Science is way more than just observations. Okay? If you look at the scientific method, observations is what they use to come up with theories and test theories. Yet, observations can be used by astronomers to come up with theories and to test theories, and observations can also be used by astrologers, you know, the people who believe in palm reading and stuff like this, and they can come up with their own sort of unfalsifiable conclusions. Observations can be misused. Observations don't change. Observations are absolutely true. Science is way more than just observations. And look at this amazing shift, which I was speaking about before, paradigm shift. Newton's theory of evolution, Newton's theory of model of the universe, it worked well for over 200 years. And if you were to make precise calculations based upon his theory, you'd be confirmed. You'd repeatedly see that it's coming true. Yet, at the beginning of the 20th century, Einstein came along and he showed that actually Newton's model of the universe was incorrect. Well, for 200 years, made precise predictions which were confirmed, and all of the physicists in the world, if you were to interview them prior to Einstein and say, is Newton's model of the universe true? It's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. Of course it's true. Yet, we now know that it is not absolutely true. Now, what did Einstein do? Did he just revise a little tweak here and there? He actually created a paradigm shift of our understanding about the universe. Firstly, you know the famous example of the apple falling, you know, gravity, right? Made up story, but Newton's idea that gravity was a pulling force, Einstein said it's not a pulling force. It's a pushing force due to space-time curvature. The very definition of mass, Einstein changed. And I want you to understand, imagine there's a scientist working really, really hard in the lab, doing all these sort of calculations, you know, working out all these squiggly lines, then he uses he uses the definition of mass, and then he calculates something, and then he shows that it's true, and you come along and you say, by the way, you know, that definition of mass that you used, which has been working for 200 years, is actually false, which is exactly what Einstein did. Also, time and space, it was assumed by Newton, or the Newtonian model, is fixed. Yet Einstein came along and said time and space is dynamic, is changing, and which is very hard to, you know, reconcile. I mean, what does that even mean? It's actually very difficult to visualize. You can see, I've got some images down there, the difference between space and time being fixed and space and time being dynamic, but you can clearly see this huge paradigm shift which existed in a scientific theory which was thought to be true. And of course, for the public, they would see Newton's theory work for 200 years, they would say it's absolutely true, but, you know, Einstein showed it wasn't. Theories work even when they're wrong. And I want you really to understand this. Just because it makes confirmed predictions does not mean it's absolutely true. Firstly, a very good example of this is the element nitrogen. Nitrogen is an element, it's an observation. We use it, in cars, nitrogen boosters. I'm sure students at Birmingham City University can't afford cars like this. But say if you did own this car, and you had your nitrogen boosters, and you're really going down, speeding to get to Fajr on time, and I was to stop you on the way, and I was to say to you, excuse me, brother or sister, you do realize that nitrogen that you're using for your car is based upon a theory of phlogiston, which turned out to be false. Now, assuming they're awake enough to understand what I actually said, they'll say, but what are you talking about? You're telling me the theory that they used to discover nitrogen is actually false? Well, it is. Phlogiston, it was a theory about combustion, and we used it to discover nitrogen, yet today it's believed to be false and it's been discarded. Likewise, we landed on the moon based upon Newtonian mechanics. And if Newton was alive, say if I was to go back some 300 years, go back to Newton, go meet him at Cambridge, and say to him, Newton, please can we calculate if there is a rocket and we want to send it to the moon, what acceleration do we need, how much fuel do we need, what do we need here, what do we need there? You could easily calculate how to go to the moon, and we did go to the moon based upon Newtonian model of the universe. It works. But the background assumptions about time and space, about the pulling force of gravity, all of this turned out to be false. So science works even when it's wrong. Scientific theories work even when they contradict each other. And sometimes a scientific theory, it contradicts another theory, then it's replaced. And sometimes, because both theories are so good, scientists can't decide which one to drop. And a classical example, if you're studying physics, you would know, is the theory of general relativity and the theory of quantum mechanics. Both of these theories are fantastically successful. They make confirmed predictions, which are reconfirmed, 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 yet they cannot both be absolutely true. Their assumptions are different. Now, what do scientists do? Scientists don't say, let's get rid of both of them, or let's choose relativity over quantum mechanics or vice versa. They say, no, let's ride both these horses. Let's see how it goes. Maybe you can come up with a theory of quantum gravity or whatever. All science changes. This is well known within the philosophy of science. For example, in the philosophy of science, a very short introduction by Oxford University, it says, historically, there's many cases of theories we now believe to be false, but that were empirically quite successful. And the philosopher of science, Larry Loden, he works at the University of Texas. He's put together a philosophical paper which includes 30 successful scientific theories across the scientific spectrum, which were really successful, but which turned out to be false. So this is well known within the philosophy of science. Of course, even many scientists don't know this, and the general public definitely doesn't know this. And the best that scientists can do at any point is render comparative judgments. This is what it says in Evidence and Evolution, published by Cambridge University. This is by Elliot Subboor, a philosopher of biology. You have that scatter graph, you have those observations. Somebody says, I want to draw a straight line. Somebody else says, I want to draw a curve. The best scientists can do at any point is say, amongst all these alternatives, we think this one's the best. But that's all they can do. That's the highest level of certainty you can get. There's no such thing as there is no explanation of this data except this one theory. It doesn't work that way. They are alternatives to our best theories in science, even when we are unable to conceive of them at the time. This is what philosophers of science say. And again, in Philosophy of Science, a new introduction by Oxford University, it says, science is revisable. Hence, to talk of scientific proof is dangerous, because the term fosters the idea of conclusions that are graven in stone. So, someone says, I got some scientific proof, Islam is false because of this theory, or Christianity is false, or whatever. The first thing you have to do is explain to them, there's no such thing as scientific proof, as in a theory has been proven. All a theory can do is be a workable model which can then be falsified. That's the way that science works. and scientific observations are obviously absolutely true. You know, a trilobite, DNA, water molecule, whatever. That's absolutely true. But obviously, that's not something which you can just use and say the only explanation of this is this particular theory. And even the most well-known Darwinist in the world, Richard Dawkins of Oxford University, the most well-known atheist in the world, which we're going to cover in at the end of the presentation as well, even he admits in his book, A Devil's Chaplain, we must acknowledge the possibility that new facts may come to light which will force our successors of the 21st century to abandon Darwinism or modify it beyond recognition. Now I want you to understand, after this point, I'm not going to be covering the philosophy of science. But I want you to understand, even if I didn't give any examples of why Darwin's theory of evolution is speculative, is based on a probabilistic framework, it is based on assumptions which are challenged, it's got disputes, it's got alternatives, even if none of that existed, purely understanding the philosophy of science, you would know, is not absolutely true, even though we can accept it as a working model theory and paradigm. So, what I'm going to be covering now, imagine if there is a really zealous Darwinist and he comes here and he says, you know what guys, I'm going to give you absolute proof that Darwin's theory of evolution is absolutely true. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a 3-hour presentation, and he does give you a 3-hour presentation where he speaks about biochemistry, where he speaks about genetics, where he speaks about anatomy, where he speaks about psychology, where he speaks about sociology, where he speaks about language, where he speaks about the fossil record, where he speaks about paleoanthropology, where he speaks about biogeography, and he says, you know, all these fields, they all lead to one conclusion. Darwin's theory of evolution is absolutely true. And then some guy in the corner, maybe Tansif over there, he raises his hands and says, well, do you know what, Professor, great presentation, very enlightening, but according to mainstream secular academics, Darwin's theory of evolution is based on a probabilistic framework. It has assumptions which are being challenged, and there's disputes about its most fundamental ideas. Now, who'd be brave enough to actually do that? Well, inshallah, God willing, after this lecture, you should be, if you stay awake for the next 45 minutes, not 45 minutes, about half an hour. First thing we have to do is we have to make a distinction between evolution and Darwinism. Okay, this is very, very important. If I was to speak about the definitions of evolution and how many different definitions of evolution and the misuse of the word evolution, I could give a whole day workshop on just the word evolution and how it's got so many different meanings and it's led to so much confusion. So, let me just explain from the basics. Evolution as a basic observation has been known and documented and thought about by human beings for the last at least 3,000 to 4,000 years in our written literature. Let me repeat that again. Evolution as an observation and people thinking about evolution and theories of evolution within human history, within our written human record, we have going back to at least 3,000 to 4,000 years. We have the ancient Chinese talking about it, we have the ancient Brahmins, the ancient Vedantic philosophers of India talking about it, we have the ancient Greeks speaking about it, we have Buddhists speaking about it, we have Taoists speaking about it. This is well known and understood. Evolution as a basic idea, a basic observation of biological change over time is absolutely true. Okay, I want you to understand that. Evolution as an observation, which has been noted down in human literature for the last 3,000 to 4,000 years, as a basic observation of biological change over time is absolutely true. Darwin's theory of evolution is a theory which has two parts, which is a history and a mechanism, and this is not absolutely true. This is a scientific theory which is based on a probabilistic framework, which has assumptions, which has disputes about its most fundamental ideas. We have to make the distinction between evolution and Darwin's theory of evolution. 50 years before Darwin's publication, at least 50 years before his publication of The Origin of Species, another biologist by the name John Baptiste Lamarck a French biologist, he published his own theory of evolution, which had two parts, which was a history of evolution, which was a hedge of life, which had multiple origins, multiple parallel lines of evolution taking place, and yet a mechanism, which was a mechanism known as the inheritance of acquired characteristics. Darwin came 50 years after him, and he published his own theory, in which he took all of life and he said, no, it has one origin. And the one origin led to the tree of life, and the mechanism is natural selection. So there's a clear difference between evolution and Darwin's theory of evolution. The reason why I'm highlighting this is because there's a fallacy of equivocation that happens, and the people who are especially guilty of doing this are the neo-atheists, right? The neo-atheist movement. When you ask them, okay, you're saying this is Darwin's theory of evolution is absolutely true, give me some evidence that's absolutely true. And the first thing they're going to point to is how bacteria change, how butterflies change, how, you know, you might have had evolution from this type of, you know, a chihuahua and a bulldog. Originally they had some sort of common ancestor between them. But who cares? That's such a trivial fact. It's such a trivial observation. What they need to prove, if they want to show it's absolutely true, is that the tree of life is true. That every single organism, human beings, elephants, flies, trees, dinosaurs, everything going back billions of years ago came from one cell. That's the tree of life. That's what they need to show. But when you ask them for proof of Darwin's theory, and they need to show that this happened via natural selection. But what they do is, and it works on people who don't actually know what Darwin's theory of evolution is actually about, is, oh, you want proof? Here's the proof. Bacteria change. It's been observed. So I want you to understand there's a clear difference between these two things. Evolution is an observation. It's absolutely true. It's been known for at least 3,000 to 4,000 years. Darwin's theory of evolution is made of two parts, a history and a mechanism. Just like Lamarck had a history and a mechanism. Lamarck's history and mechanism was hedge of life and inheritance of acquired characteristics. Darwin's is the tree of life and natural selection. And of course it's not absolutely true. In equating evolution with Darwinian evolution is actually false. And it happens all the time. Sometimes, sadly, even within, it can happen within technical literature as well. Now, the way, and I want you to imagine this, right? We're right now in March 2017. If I was to ask you, I want you to work out the history of life, right? What happened? What was here approximately 4 billion years ago? How did it change into something else? It would be incredibly difficult. And the way that biologists have described it, and this is from, this analogy is taken from Science, a peer-reviewed journal, it's like trying to work out the plot of Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace with 13 randomly selected pages. So if I got War and Peace and I got a whole bunch of copies and I gave them to every single person in this room, and 13 pages had writing and the rest of the book was blank. And remember, this is one of the biggest books we have, one of the biggest books you can get on Amazon, 500,000 words. And I was to give you this book, and I said to you, okay, now complete the story. How did it begin? How did it end? Which, you know, what's the plot? What happened here? What happened there? You only have 13 randomly selected pages and all the rest of the pages are blank. Every single person in this room will come up with a different story. Will come up with a different hypothesis. Will come up with a different beginning, different end. Why? Because most of the data is missing. Only 13 pages exist. And this is the analogy that biologists use. So it's not just a scatter graph, which I spoke about before, it's a scatter graph on steroids. It is so incredibly difficult. This isn't even a normal, you know, some scientific problems are a lot more easier to solve than others. This is incredibly difficult. We're speaking about something that happened 4 billion years ago. If I was to ask you what happened in this spot in Birmingham 1 million years ago, we'd be baffled. We'd be like, how do we work it out? Where do we begin? Well, how can we work out with certainty what happened 4 billion years ago? And when, according to the best estimate that we have at the moment, 99, and this is according to the National Science Foundation in a study published last year in May, 99.999% of species, biological species, are unobserved. We don't have them alive today, we don't have their fossil bones, We don't have anything. We don't even have we don't have their genes. We don't have the image of them. We have nothing. 99.999% of species are missing. So there could have been things even grander than dinosaurs, things even stranger than the most strangest fishes that we have in the oceans. There could have been things which were, bigger than the dolphin. They could have been. Fossilization is an extremely, extremely rare thing. So according to the National Science Foundation, 99.999% of species are unobserved. We have nothing. So, going back, it is just like that. It's like trying to work out the plot of Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace with 13 randomly selected pages. Now, what have scientists actually done? Scientists, what they do is they can look at the piece of data, the history of life on Earth, and they can come up with many different, multiple alternative ideas. So, classical Darwinism is universal common ancestry in the tree of life. You can come up with that based upon what we know. You can come up with a hedge of life, which is what Lamarck believed in, which is multiple lines of endless origins, not just one origin, and parallel lines of evolution taking place. You can believe in the web of life, which is an alternative to the tree of life. You can believe in gradualism, that the change happened very gradually, which is absolutely necessary for Darwinism. Or you can believe in rapid change. You can believe in progression, like Lamarck did, or you can believe in non-progression, like classical neo-Darwinism. Whatever you make is bound to be probabilistic, and is bound to be one of a huge number of contradictory alternatives. It's open to interpretations. Also, what I want you to understand, when you watch a documentary, when you pick up a book on this, when you ask, how did this biochemical, genetic, anatomical, how did this trait evolve? How did we get this? The answer that you get is usually a scenario. What could have happened was X, what could have happened was Y. You see, what's very, very difficult is to try to show that that is actually the case. Now, the human body is absolutely amazing. It's absolutely fascinating. Just a few weeks ago, I was speaking to this doctor, and he spent a long time studying anatomy and to look at dead bodies and all this sort of stuff, all this gruesome stuff. And he was telling me that, you have blood vessels throughout your whole body. And obviously these vessels are sealed, they don't, leak out. And obviously if you get like some sort of wound, it's very dangerous. Except there is one point in your body where there is a leakage, a tiny leakage of that blood, and it actually takes place in the brain. And as it takes place in the brain, now these are just so stories, these are children's stories. I mean, you can't really, these are just scenarios that we tell them. And this is exactly what atheist evolutionary biologists are saying is being done within their field. If scientists don't understand something, some of them say, well, what could have happened is this. Well, how on earth do you know that that is actually what did actually happen? And people like Masatashi Nai, and again an atheist evolutionary biologist from Japan, he says, what's the difference between saying, natural selection, Darwin's theory of evolution did it, and God did it? He doesn't believe in God. He doesn't believe in religion, doesn't believe in anything like that. But he's an evolutionary biologist who doesn't believe in Darwinism, and he says, look, what on earth is the difference? You just take something, and a religious person says God, and the Darwinist says natural selection. Well, what difference is there? How on earth do you know that that is actually what happened? I'm going to give you one example of a just so story, because remember, every single thing as human beings and as biological species has to be explained via Darwin's theory of evolution if it's to be true. That means every single biochemical trait, every single genetic trait, every single anatomical trait, sociological trait, psychological trait, our language and biogeography and the fossil record, everything has to be explained via natural selection. Now, one of the things which obviously the evolutionary biologists have to look at is why do males like some colors and females like other colors? Color preference. And this obviously they had to come up with an evolutionary explanation according to natural selection. So the evolutionary explanation which they came up with is this. Approximately 1 million years ago, human beings lived in hunter-gatherer societies, as you can see the strong men with those spears. And when the men had to go out and hunt, they had to, they had to look at whether the sky was clear. And if it was a beautiful blue sky, then they know that this is a good day to hunt. And where they're going to go hunt these mammoths, and these other fish, and these animals. The watering hole, which is blue. Hence the people, the males who evolved a mutation to like the color blue, they were more likely to survive and to pass on their genes, hence why males like the color blue. And women, why do they like the color red? What the evolutionary theorists said is because the job of the cave woman at the time was to cook, it wasn't to hunt. Now, what are you going to cook? You're going to cook meat. And what are you going to cook? What color is meat? Meat is red. And to be a cave woman who is likely to survive, you have to take care of your family. And if you evolve a mutation to like the color red, then you are more likely to survive in that environment, help your family survive and reproduce. So women, obviously, when they went out to go pick as well, apples are red, berries are red, strawberries are red, so they evolved to like the color red. Now, Raymond Tallis, he's a philosopher of science, again, he's an atheist. He challenged this idea of color preference evolutionary scenarios, and he said, guys, this is getting a bit ridiculous because men liking the color blue and women liking the color red is a very recent phenomenon. 150 years ago, men generally liked the color red within Europe, and women liked the color blue. And even the color pink was seen as a fiery version of red, so men used to wear the color pink because it was very masculine. Now, Raymond Tallis basically said, your scenario doesn't make any sense, because only 150 years ago, the color preference was reversed. So that evolutionary scenario, that just so story to explain color preference is, you know, an example of a just so story which is so hard to disprove. Yet, when you hear it for the first time without, you know, obviously finding out about the other reasons why it's wrong, it sounds very convincing. But the problem is, how on earth can you test every single biochemical, anatomical, and genetic trait whether this did actually happen? It's actually impossible. You can't do that because there's trillions of traits. And there's a difference between what is theoretically possible and what actually happened. Yes, it's theoretically possible that color evolution was a result of living in a hunter-gatherer society 1 million years ago. That's theoretically possible. And there may be no counter-evidence to that. But that doesn't mean it actually happened. And that's the difference between an observation and a scientific theory. A scientific theory will always give you a theoretical framework, but you cannot prove it to be absolutely true. There's a difference between a theoretical explanation and an actual explanation. Also, Darwin's tree of life is based on an assumption, and the assumption is the assumption of homology. Homology is the idea that if there's similarity, that similarity is due to common descent, which is why human beings and chimpanzees are thought to have a common ancestor. Because if you look at the human arm and the chimp arm, they're quite similar. If you look at certain features of the skull of the human being and the chimp, they're quite similar. So this is known as homology. But the first thing to realize is homology is an assumption. No one observed the divergence between human beings and chimpanzees, which is supposed to happen 6 to 7 million years ago. Previously they said it happened about 20 million years ago. No one was around to see that. So you can't say, we have this assumption, so it's absolutely true. It doesn't matter if our genetics, our biochemistry, our anatomy is identical to that of a chimpanzee. It doesn't mean we have a common ancestor with them, because this is an assumption. But the issue is, we have counter-examples to this assumption of homology, known as homoplasy, which is genetic, biochemical, anatomical, psychological, and even sociological traits which cannot possibly be due to common descent. This is the exact opposite of homology. Let me just give you an example. You have a wing of a bat and the wing of a bird. Both of them have wings and they use them for flying, yet this is not due to common ancestry. This is known as homoplasy. Likewise, we have discovered a placental saber-toothed tiger and I've forgotten the placental saber-toothed tiger, and there's a second term which I actually forgot. Now, marsupial. So placental and marsupial. Now, if you were to look at the anatomy of a placental and a marsupial saber-toothed tiger. And in the Philosophy of Human Evolution, published by Cambridge University, has a reconstruction of what they look like based upon the fossils. If you were to look at them, and I didn't actually put the picture up here, you would look at them and you'd say, they look almost identical. Yet they do not have a common ancestor. In fact, the placental saber-toothed tiger is closer to a kangaroo than it is to the marsupial saber-toothed tiger, according to Darwinists themselves. So homoplasy exists at the genetic level, the biochemical level, anatomical level, sociological level, and it even exists at the language level. Also, if you look at echolocation, an amazing system. SubhanAllah, when you look at that system, you know, you send out these waves, they come back, and we as human beings are mimicking the technology which exists within nature. The technology of nature is absolutely amazing. Now, if you look at echolocation, bats use echolocation, and dolphins use echolocations. And if you look at the genes of the bat and the genes of the dolphin for echolocation, they're identical. But it's not due to common descent. So, you know, when somebody says there's a gene in a human being and a gene in a rat and a gene in a human being and a gene, so what? Because there's genes in the bat and genes in the dolphin which are identical, which are not due to homology, which are due to homoplasy. Another example, and you know, I think this is one of the most misunderstood areas, and it seems very convincing unless you know the background to it, is when they take a human being and they take a chimpanzee and they say, look at the similarities. There has to be a common descent. You have to be an absolute retard to reject it. Well, no, because it's an assumption. No one observed the divergence between human beings and chimpanzees. It is not absolutely true. And secular mainstream philosophers of science, secular mainstream philosophers of biology, secular mainstream evolutionary biologists who believe in Darwinism would say the same thing. They would say it's based on a probabilistic framework, it has assumptions, and they are conceptual problems. Now let me just give you a few examples. You look at the human anatomy and they say, well, it's close to a chimpanzee, therefore we have a common ancestor. Well, again, it's an assumption. No one observed it. Even if we didn't have counterexamples to it, it's still an assumption. Like I mentioned previously, all over nature we have homoplasy. We have genetic traits, anatomical traits, biochemical traits which are not due to common ancestry. Now what's interesting, the language in terms of human beings, the closest creature which exists in terms of our language is not the chimpanzee. Chimpanzee grunt. Human beings have a complex specified language, and at the beginning of this presentation there was a beautiful verse from Surah Rahman about Allah teaching us eloquent speech. Now the only creature which exists, which we know of today, which is the closest to the human being in terms of its language, is not the chimpanzee at all. It's actually songbirds. That's the closest in terms of our language. Yet no one would say that's due to common ancestry. Also, chimpanzees live in maximum populations of 100. The only creature which is the closest to the human being in terms of our social behavior is the one that's mentioned in the Quran, which is the ant. Ants live in populations of millions like human beings do. Not chimpanzees, they only live in 100. Ants have an economy, they have warfare, they have funerals, they have slavery, they even have these, I don't know the best way to describe them, I think, you know, it's kind of like self-sacrificing ants. Like when they go out to fight, you have a special regiment of ants that go out purely to die for the sake of the colony. And all of those ants, those million ants that live within a colony, they're all brothers and sisters, they only have one mother. Sociologically, the closest thing to human beings is ants. And even Darwinian biologists would agree to this. So this whole idea of, look, oh my God, it's so similar, this gene between a human being and a gene in a chimpanzee, therefore we have a common ancestor, this is just very, very childish. It's based on a probabilistic framework, which has assumptions, which has disputes. Just recently, a few weeks ago, there was a paper published by Andrew Inkpen and Ford Doolittle, two evolutionary biologists who are atheists, called Molecular Phylogenetics and the Perennial Problem of Homology, which basically spoke about, when we go to the genetic level, the problem of homology, homoplasy, gets worse. You can't just say human being has a gene and a human being has a chimpanzee has a gene, therefore we have a common ancestor, because we know so many other counter examples to that. Even within Evidence in Evolution, published by Cambridge University, it says the following. Both of the following thoughts are naive. Humans and chimpanzees must share a common ancestor because they're so similar. And human and mushrooms must have arisen independently because they're so different. Within a probabilistic framework, there is no must in either case. Now that sounds very strange, because if you watch documentaries, especially, made by certain TV channels, it's like, there's a chimpanzee, look at their behavior, oh my God, look at, they may say, look at the way it's behaving, it's using tools, it's doing this, it's doing that. And they say, definitely has a common ancestor with us. But homology, homoplasy is a quagmire and is based on a probabilistic framework which has assumptions, which has conceptual problems. So it's not absolutely true, even according to the most fiercest proponents. If you bring into this room the most fiercest proponent of Darwinian evolution, if people in the public, if the people watching are unaware, he may get away with saying, yes, absolutely true. But if you bring to him this, and you bring to him publications like this book from Cambridge University, or Parsimony, Phylogeny and Genomics by Oxford University, whatever, you bring any of these technical literature and you say to him, what are you talking about? It says it's a probabilistic framework which has assumptions, which has counterfactuals, which has conceptual problems. He'll say, yeah, it's not absolutely true, it's based on a probabilistic framework. But sadly, again, like I mentioned at the beginning, there's a huge difference between the way Darwinian evolution is pursued and the way it's actually perceived. Okay, now we're coming to slowly the end of the science part, and then we're going to move on to the interesting part, which I think is the most interesting. So we probably have about another maybe 25 minutes, 20 minutes left. Darwin's theory of evolution is based on a whole bunch of assumptions. Okay? These assumptions are being challenged by mainstream secular academics who don't believe in God. They're evolutionary biologists who don't agree with his most fundamental assumptions. Some don't accept natural selection as a driving force, genes being transmitted vertically. We now know of horizontal gene transfer, the gene-centered view, the famous selfish gene view, which is being challenged, and scientists, biologists, evolutionary biologists are saying, Richard Dawkins, he's not even he's not even a scientist, he's a science journalist, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Gradualism is being challenged by rapid saltational change, tree of life, like I said, the hedge of life, the web of life, acquired characteristics are not inherited. This is something which, Richard Dawkins in The Selfish Gene in the 80s edition, he said, it's impossible, you can't have this. Yet we've discovered it in the last couple of years. Mutations are random. Well, evolutionary biologists are arguing that, yes, we do have mutations which are random, but the mutations which are beneficial are actually targeted. According to Dennis Noble, he's a very important evolutionary biologist at Oxford University. He's still alive. He's, mashallah, 80 years old. He's still alive and kicking. He says all the central assumptions of neo-Darwinism have been disproven. Now, I'm not saying he's right. And I'm not saying that these assumptions are wrong. All I'm saying is there's a conversation going on, and this is what happens in science. It's the black swan problem and the scatter growth problem. Also, there's dissension and alternatives. There's at least 5 well-known, fully fledged alternatives to Darwinian evolution, which are proposed by atheist evolutionary biologists. There's evolution by natural genetic engineering, there's neo-Lamarckian evolution, there is mutation-driven evolution, there is symbiotic evolution or by the inheritance of acquired characteristics, and also evolution by self-organization. And if anybody's got any questions about those, we can cover them in the Q&A. We also have the third way of evolution, which is a project run by evolutionary biologists who are atheists. They don't believe in God, but they don't believe in Darwin's theory of evolution either. They say, look, in the world, we have creationism, we have religion, we have God, and we also have Darwin's theory of evolution. Darwin's theory of evolution doesn't work, and we don't accept religion or God either. So we're looking for a third way. And on this website, you'll be able to find biologists, evolutionary biologists who don't believe in Darwinism, from Oxford University, Cambridge University, MIT, Princeton, Harvard, China, Europe, North America, all over the world, you will find evolutionary biologists who don't believe in Darwin's theory of evolution. Now, something very, very interesting. Here's where we get to the link between Darwinism and atheism. If atheism is true, if naturalism is true, if all that there is material things and there is no God, then something like Darwin's theory of evolution has to be true as a matter of logic. Forget science for now. Forget it totally. Let me repeat that. If there is no God, if naturalism is true, if atheism is true, then something like Darwin's theory of evolution has to be true as a matter of logic, as 1 + 1 = 2. Hence why there's a relationship between Darwin's theory of evolution and atheism. They both go hand in hand for that reason. Even though, of course, believing in Darwinian evolution doesn't mean that you have to give up belief in God. And many evolutionary biologists believe in God, and they believe in Darwin's theory of evolution. They say God just created using this particular mechanism. This is what Gareth Nelson, a biologist, evolutionary biologist and professor, this is what he says. We've got to have some ancestors, meaning human beings. We have to have some non-human ancestors. Why? Sorry, we'll pick those. Why? Because we know they have to be there, and these are the best candidates. Why is that the case? Because if human beings, if supernaturalism is false, if naturalism is true, then we have to have a naturalistic origin. And the closest thing to us in nature, according to the assumption of homology, is chimpanzees. Which is why I put this image up there. Anybody knows who this is? Huh? This is not Krishna. This is Hanuman.
Is
right?
it the Egyptian?
It's half man, half human being. Now, the Hindu philosophers of India, 3,000 years ago, in the Padma Purana, which is one of the oldest religious texts in the Hindu religion, they claimed human beings came from a chimpanzee-like creature. And they claimed the tree of life, something very similar to the tree of life. They didn't have science. They didn't have the theory of natural selection. And according to Professor Monier Williams at Oxford University, who's a professor of Sanskrit, he said the Hindus were Darwinists hundreds of years before the birth of Darwin. Why? Because they believed in naturalism. So proto-naturalism, proto-Darwinism has to be true as a matter of logic if there is no God, which is why atheism and Darwinism go hand in hand. And Richard Lewontin, who I mentioned before, he also mentioned the same thing. He said, look, we are forced by our a priori adherence. A scientific theory in the history of the world, which has morphed from a scientific theory into a fully fledged religion, into a fully fledged political systems, and an ethical system. And I'm not the one saying this. This is mainstream secular evolutionary biologists, mainstream secular philosophers of science. For example, these three gentlemen. Julian Huxley, he was the first president of the United Nations UNESCO, which deals with education, and he was an atheist evolutionary biologist. He was very anti-God. He used to make very vulgar remarks about God. And you can imagine a person like this in that sort of position as the first president of UNESCO. And he wrote a book called Religion Without Revelation. Religion Without Revelation, which was about Darwinism. And he said we have to evangelize the world about this belief. And he said it's way more than a scientific theory. It's actually three questions. No, two. Yeah, two questions. Okay, the question is about, can you briefly explain about induction and deduction and conclusions about that? Okay, something to think about. As I mentioned previously, science leads to conclusions which can be revised, which can be changed, which can be altered, which can be discarded and replaced by other conclusions. Why? Because you'll get new pieces of information which will challenge your previous conclusion. Now, about knowledge, this is actually about knowledge, it's got nothing to do with evolution or anything like that. How do we know what we believe to be true as Muslims? Well, we as Muslims, we would say that, not regarding evolution or anything else, but just generally as Muslims, we would use a few lines of argument to show why we believe Islam to be true. Now the first thing to understand is that the belief in God is something which is natural to human beings, right? There's a lot of people out there who say, well, to believe in God, there's believers in God and non-believers in God who say something which is incorrect, which is that they say belief in God, is based on reason alone. It's based on rational arguments alone. Some believers in God say this, and atheists would say there are no rational reasons to believe in God. But Islam says something different. It says belief in God is based upon our own nature as human beings. We have been created in a way to recognize the Creator internally. Okay? Now, I've had this experience myself, and this experience the Quran speaks about, and this is an experience which is universal in terms of human beings. Everybody has either had this experience, or spoken to somebody who's had this experience, or they know somebody who knows somebody who has had this experience. It's cross-cultural, which is when a human being gets into trouble, when they are in a dire situation, as the Quran mentions, when they're on a ship and waves are coming and they feel that they're about to die, they call out to God, they say, please save us from this, and then, I will be grateful and I will believe and whatnot. And I've met, even recently I met a very strong atheist who became a believer in God, but he didn't become a Muslim, a Christian, or he didn't believe in any religion, but he says, I now accept the belief in God. And he was brought up as an atheist. He wasn't brought up as a Christian and became an atheist, or Muslim or became an atheist. He was brought up, and his parents were atheists, and all throughout his life he said, there's no God. There's no rational reasons for God. There's nothing, it's all rubbish. And when he got into a life and death situation, he told me, he called out to God, and he said God helped him, and he says, I now believe in God. Now if you actually look at his thinking, nobody came up to him when he was in that dire situation and said to him, let me give you a philosophical, really crazy, argument about the existence of God. Let me give you the design argument, the cosmological argument, let me give you the moral argument. No. He instantly called out to God, which is what the Quran says. Allah, God, created human beings with a nature to recognize Him. So when Allah took out all the souls of all the people that were ever to exist, all of the children of Adam, all of them, and He said, am I not your Lord? All of humanity testified, yes, you are our Lord. Which is why the fitrah, as we call it, the natural innate disposition which is in human beings, is the basis, is the reason why people turn to God in times of need and people believe in God. Now reason is kind of like a trigger. It can help you trigger. Like say somebody is a bit confused, reason can help trigger that internal truth. Likewise, all human beings, Allah has created a system that within us we know about right and wrong. Now all across the world people have different concepts of right or wrong, but they have the idea that some things are wrong and some things are right. And even the idea of sin and the idea of guilt. These are all internal things. So when it comes to the Quran, when the fitrah is pure, when the fitrah is unchanged, right? When it's not covered, what happens? You recognize it instantly. And I've had experiences with people who came from backgrounds such as Hinduism, and at a young age they rejected. I'm sure many of you here have heard of Salahuddin Patel. He's one of the guys who works with me in IRA. He gives a lot of talks around universities as well. And this is what he said to me. He said, I was young, I was in a Hindu family, and they taught us that, there's multiple gods, and the elephant god, and this and this and this. And I said, no. At the age of 10, he said he left Hinduism, and he became a muwahid, which is what Abraham was. He was a muwahid. He was someone who believed in God, but then, didn't have revelation, didn't have a thing. Now afterwards, he read the Quran, and what was the Quran's message? You worship God alone. You don't worship God through Jesus, you don't worship God through Ganesh, you just worship God very directly. So, how we know Islam to be true? Well, firstly, it's a fitrah belief. It's something like that. Then afterwards, you can come up with linguistic argument, predictions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. You can come up with things which the Quran said were going to happen and they actually happen. But all of that is irrelevant. All of those abstract philosophical reasoning, rational arguments are irrelevant if the fitrah is, suppressed. So in terms of knowledge, that's all I actually want to say. One more thing about human evolution. Okay, it's very tricky, the word evolution, which is human beings are the result of a pig mating with a chimp, which was proposed by people like Eugene McCarthy, an evolutionary biologist, or human-chimp ancestry without the pig, or the aquatic ape theory, that human beings were quasi-ape mermaids for millions of years, hence why we're hairless, hence why we have this. Now, of course, all these theories, we would say, they're just theories. They can believe it if they want, but we don't accept it to be true. But as human evolution stands, in terms of general biological change over time, of course, we have no reason to deny that. And what do I mean? This question is so long. What do I mean by accepting it as a working model, working theory, working paradigm? Okay, what I mean is this. At the beginning of the 20th century, almost all physicists, not almost all, vast majority of physicists believed in the steady state theory, which said the universe had no beginning. And the Quran explicitly mentions the universe has a beginning. Now, at the beginning of the 20th century, they believed in this theory, and it was the prevailing system that they had. Now, I as a Muslim, would I go and start challenging every single physicist in the world if I was alive at the time? No. I would say, well, you have a scientific theory.
إن المصدقين والمصدقات وأقرضوا الله قرضا حسنا يضاعف لهم ولهم أجر كريم.